At 16, I watched my dad go to prison for defending me. Hours later, my stepdad locked me in my bedroom with a deadbolt installed from the outside and told the world I was lying. What happened over the next 72 hours changed everything. This is the true story of how I fought to survive, documented every second, and made sure no one could ever call me a liar again. If you've ever been told no one will believe you, this is for you. It was the kind of courtroom silence that makes your ears ring. Not because it was quiet. There were sniffles, shuffling papers, the creak of wooden benches, but because my whole body had gone numb. The judge's voice cut through like a blade. 5 years. Just like that. My dad, the only person who ever saw what Brandon really was being led away in handcuffs for beating my stepdad to a pulp. But here's what no one in that room knew. My dad didn't start that fight. He finished it. And he did it because I finally told him the truth. I was 16. And that day, in that courthouse hallway, I made a promise to myself. I would never tell the truth again. Not if it got the people who loved me locked up. Not if it left me alone with monsters. My mom sobbed the whole drive home, mascara streaking down her cheeks like war paint. In the back seat, I stared out the window, my fingers digging into my thighs so hard I left half-moon marks. Brandon sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting casually on the console, the other reaching back to stroke Mom's hair like he was soothing a frightened animal. "You did the right thing, baby," he murmured. He was poisoning her mind. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom turned off the engine and just sat there for a full minute, breathing like she was underwater. Then, in this broken whisper, she said, "I'm going to stay with my friend Tilly for a few days." My stomach dropped. "Please don't leave me alone with him," I blurted, grabbing her arm before I could stop myself. She turned so fast I barely saw it coming. The slap cracked across my face like a gunshot in the quiet car. "Your father filled your head with lies," she hissed, eyes wet but furious. "Brandon's been nothing but good to us." I didn't say another word. I just watched as she got out, walked into the house, and came back dragging every suitcase we owned. She packed like she was fleeing a war zone. Clothes, toiletries, photo albums, even the stupid ceramic mug I made her in 3rd grade. And then she left. Just like that, no hug. No, "I'll be back soon." Nothing. Brandon stood in the doorway as her car disappeared down the street. He didn't wave. He just turned, locked the deadbolt with a soft click, and slipped the key into his pocket. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. With these small, beady eyes that traveled slowly down my body like he was memorizing every inch. "Let's talk about what you told your father," he said, voice low and syrupy. I bolted for the stairs. Halfway up, I felt his hand clamp around my ankle like a steel trap. I kicked backward with everything I had, my heel connected with something soft, and heard him grunt in pain. I didn't look back. I slammed my bedroom door shut and shoved my entire wardrobe in front of it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when I noticed the window. The frame was sealed shut, not just locked, but screwed in place. Tiny metal heads glinted in the afternoon sun. He'd been planning this. For how long? Days? Weeks? Then I heard it. The whine of a power drill starting up downstairs. My blood turned to ice. He was coming. I pressed my ear to the door and listened as his footsteps climbed the stairs, slow and deliberate. The drill stopped right outside my room. I heard the buzz of the motor, the scrape of metal on wood, the soft thunk of something being secured. My hands trembled as I tried the doorknob. It didn't budge. He'd locked me in, from the outside. His voice floated through the door, sing-song and cruel. "We have 3 days. 3 days to teach you what happens to little girls who tell lies about their stepdaddies." I tore through my closet like a madwoman, throwing clothes, books, old shoes, anything that might help. And then I found it. My old Chromebook buried under a pile of winter sweaters. I flipped it open, fingers flying across the keys. Discord. My best friend Maya was online. Brandon locked me in my room. "He's going to hurt me," she replied instantly. "Is this about your dad? You promised you wouldn't tell." Before I could type another word, the screen went black. The whole house went silent. He'd cut the power. Panic clawed up my throat, but I forced it down. Think. Think. I grabbed the lamp from my nightstand, cheap, plastic, but heavy, and swung it with all my strength at the window. Glass shattered. An alarm shrieked through the house like a banshee. I didn't hesitate. I climbed onto the sill, shards biting into my palms, and scrambled out onto the narrow ledge. Below me, the ground looked miles away. Behind me, I heard the splintering crash of my bedroom door giving way. Brandon was laughing. Actually laughing. Like this was some game he'd been waiting to play. I inched sideways along the ledge, heart hammering, until I reached the bathroom window. It was open a crack. I grabbed the frame and dropped inside, landing hard on the tile. My ankle screamed, but I didn't care. I locked the bathroom door and turned toward the tiny window above the toilet, the one I'd never been able to reach before. I heard him outside the door now, voice calm but edged with fury. "You're making this so much worse, sweetheart." The door exploded inward. He grabbed my ankles and yanked. I clawed at the window frame until my nails bent backward and snapped. Blood smeared the tiles. He pulled harder and slipped. In that split second, I twisted free and tumbled through the window, falling into the thorny bushes below. Adrenaline drowned the pain. I forced myself up and ran, barefoot, bleeding, gasping, toward Miss Apple's house next door. She'd known me since I was 5. She'd baked me cookies when my goldfish died. She had to believe me. I looked back once. Brandon stood on our front porch, hands in his pockets, watching me run like he had all the time in the world. Because he knew I couldn't get far. Miss Apple's porch light flicked on. The door opened. "Help!" I tried to scream, but it came out as a broken whisper. "Oh my goodness, what happened to you, dear?" she cried, stepping onto the porch. Before I could answer, Brandon was beside me, kneeling with this perfect mask of concern. "Miss Apple, I'm so sorry about this. She's been having episodes since her father went to prison." He pulled out his phone and showed her a string of fake texts, dozens of them, from my mom. "She's self-injuring. Making up stories. Needs professional help." Miss Apple's eyes filled with pity. She took my arm gently. "Sweetheart, you're bleeding all over the place. Let's get you cleaned up." "No," I choked out. He locked me in. "Shh," Brandon said softly, picking me up like I weighed nothing. "It's okay. Daddy's got you." And just like that, I was back inside the house. He sat me on the couch and pulled out the first aid kit. As he dabbed alcohol on my cuts, each touch burning like fire, he whispered, "You're going to keep quiet from now on. No one's here to protect you." Then he reached under the couch and pulled out a coil of rope. 3 days is a long time to be locked in here with me. He grabbed my wrists. I bit down on his hand so hard I tasted blood, coppery and warm. He jerked back, cursing, staring at the wound like he couldn't believe I'd fought back. For a second, I thought he'd hit me. But instead, his face changed. The rage melted into something colder, calculated. He wrapped his hand in his shirt, the fabric blooming red, and spoke in this soft, rehearsed voice. "We need to talk about boundaries and consequences." I nodded, voice trembling. "I'll listen. I'll do whatever you want, just please don't hurt me." He bought it. Sat in the armchair across from me, still bleeding, still watching. Then he called my mom on speaker. She answered immediately, voice thick with tears. Brandon told her I'd attacked him, hurt myself, and needed inpatient treatment. And my mom, my own mother, said, "I knew this would happen." That's when I realized they'd planned this together. She left me here on purpose. After he hung up, I forced myself to stay calm. Told him my hand hurt and I needed the bathroom. He followed me, stood outside the door. But while I was in there, I spotted a shard of glass near the shower, leftover from my escape. I palmed it, hid it in my sock. The sharp edge bit into my skin, but it felt like hope. When he walked me back to my room, he showed me the new deadbolt he'd installed. 3 days, he said again, like it was a promise. The lock clicked. I was alone, but not helpless. I pulled out the glass shard and scratched a message under my dresser. Locked from outside by Brandon. Date. Time. Then I waited. Because I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't get out, no one was coming to save me. The moment that deadbolt clicked behind me, I stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. Not out of fear, though God knows I was terrified, but because I needed to hear everything. The creak of the floorboards as Brandon walked away. The hum of the refrigerator kicking on downstairs. The distant buzz of a neighbor's lawnmower. Normal sounds. Life going on like nothing was wrong. Like I wasn't trapped in my own bedroom with a man who just told me he had 3 days to teach me a lesson. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for a dentist appointment, not a nightmare. My mind raced, but my body stayed still. Stillness was survival now. Every movement had to mean something. Every breath had to be quiet. I pulled the glass shard from my sock. It was small, barely the size of a fingernail, but sharp enough to draw blood if I pressed hard. I held it against my palm and made a decision. If he came back tonight, I wouldn't just bite him. I'd cut him, deep, in the face, in the throat. I didn't care anymore about consequences. I cared about staying alive, but first I needed proof. I got down on my knees and dragged my dresser away from the wall. The wood groaned and I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the TV murmuring downstairs. Some crime drama, ironic as hell. I reached under the frame and used the glass to carve into the bare wood, locked from outside by Brandon. June 14th, 8:47 p.m. My handwriting was shaky but legible. If someone ever searched this room, really searched it, they'd find it. Then I thought of my body. I rolled up my sleeve and stared at my forearm. Rope burns circled both wrists like grotesque bracelets. Cuts from the window glass lined my palms. Bruises bloomed on my shins from where Brandon had dragged me across Miss Apple's lawn. I grabbed the pen from my nightstand, the one that still had a little ink, and started writing. Not just what happened, but when, 8:47 p.m., rope burns. Tried to tie me up, 2:52 p.m., window cuts. Escaped, fell into bushes. 3 p.m., ankle bruises. Dragged back inside, each timestamp was a fact. A timestamp couldn't lie. A timestamp couldn't be dismissed as hysteria or episodes. I wrote more on my inner thigh, where no one would see unless they were looking for evidence. My skin burned from the pressure, but I didn't stop. I was turning myself into a crime scene log. Hours passed. The house grew darker. I heard Brandon's footsteps every hour, like clockwork pausing outside my door. He was checking, making sure I hadn't vanished. I timed his pattern, 12 minutes from his room to mine, 30 seconds at the door, then back. I memorized which floorboards creaked loudest. Which ones stayed silent. Knowledge was power, and right now it was the only weapon I had. The next morning, sunlight bled through my sealed window. I tested the screws again, still tight. No escape there. But the bathroom window? That was different. Smaller, yes, but I'd already loosened one screw during my last bathroom break. Maybe I could get the others. When Brandon brought breakfast, a dry piece of toast and a bottle of water, he watched me like a hawk. "You're being very quiet," he said, voice smooth as oil. "I learned my lesson," I whispered, eyes down. "I won't cause trouble," he smiled. Not a real smile. The kind predators wear when they think the prey has given up. After he left, I tore a page from my notebook and wrote in huge, desperate letters, "Help, locked in, call police." I folded it tight and waited. At my next bathroom break, I climbed onto the toilet and shoved the note through the broken seal at the bottom of the tiny window. It fluttered down into Miss Apple's yard, landing near her recycling bin. I prayed she'd see it. That she'd remember the panic in my eyes the night before. That she'd finally believe me. But hope is dangerous when you're trapped. It makes you reckless. Later that afternoon, I triggered the smoke alarm, just for a second, by stuffing a towel into the vent. The beeping sent Brandon sprinting upstairs. I watched through the crack in my door as he reset it, annoyed but not suspicious. Now I knew. It took him 22 seconds to reach my room in an emergency. Good to know. That evening, I heard Miss Apple's voice downstairs. My heart leapt into my throat. She found the note. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear. Brandon greeted her warmly, his voice dripping with fake concern. She's been so upset since her dad went away. I moved fast. I angled myself at the gap near the banister and held up my palm. Help! Locked, still smudged in pen. I held it there for 3 seconds. Long enough. But Brandon stepped in front of me before she could react. "She's just confused," he said, chuckling softly. "Teenagers, right?" Their voices faded as he walked her back to her house. I slumped against the wall, defeated. Had she seen it? Or had he erased me again? When he returned, his voice was ice. "You just earned yourself a punishment." Minutes later, the water stopped flowing. He'd shut off the bathroom supply. I turned the faucet. Nothing. The toilet tank still had water, but that wouldn't last. My throat tightened. Dehydration was slow, deliberate. Another form of control. That night, while he dozed on the couch, I worked on the bed slat I'd snapped loose. It took 2 hours of silent, agonizing pressure, but I finally broke it clean. I hid the longer piece under my mattress, my secret pry bar. Then I started on the door hinges. Old, rusted pins. With patience, they'd give. By 3 a.m., I'd loosened them enough that the door could, maybe, be lifted off. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a plan. And plans kept me from screaming. Then I heard Mom's voice on the phone downstairs, crying, saying she couldn't do this anymore. And then the words that shattered me. Don't make me choose between you two. She'd already chosen. When she packed every suitcase. When she slapped me for begging her not to leave. When she let him install screws in my window frame without asking why. I swallowed my grief. Crying wouldn't save me. Only action would. The next morning, Brandon installed a security camera above my door. But I saw the truth instantly. No wires, no lens, just a plastic shell with a red dot that didn't even light up. A bluff. He wanted me to feel watched, controlled. But I was watching him too. Learning his lies. Cataloging his tricks. Then came the knock that changed everything. A police cruiser pulled up. Miss Apple must have called. My blood surged. I pounded on the floor, screaming until my voice cracked. But Brandon blasted the TV so loud the walls shook. The officers stayed for 10 minutes. 10 minutes while I screamed into a void. Then they left. I watched their car drive away from my window. 10 feet. That's all that separated me from help, and they never knew I was there. Brandon didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His silence was worse. But I wasn't done. I wrote everything down. The lock brand, master lock barrel bolt, the fake texts, the rehearsed voice memos I'd overheard through the vent. I folded the paper small and shoved it out the bathroom window during my next break. This time, it landed right by Miss Apple's back door. Then came the bath. He made me take one, to wash off the blood, and stood in the bathroom the whole time, watching. I kept my eyes down, but my hands worked quietly. I pulled strands of hair and tucked them under the baseboard. If this house was ever searched, my DNA would be in places it shouldn't be. Proof I'd been trying to leave a trail. And then, his mistake. He left. Said he was going to the pharmacy for antiseptic. His hand was infected from my bite. 20 minutes, he said. Extra lock set. I'll know if you try anything. The second his truck faded down the street, I moved. I jammed the bed slat into the top hinge and pushed with everything I had. The door groaned, lifted, 1 inch, 2. My shoulders screamed as I squeezed through the gap, skin tearing on the rough wood. I dropped into the hallway breathless. I didn't look back. I ran to the bathroom, shoved the dresser under the window, and worked the latch with a wire hanger. It gave. The window opened. I squeezed through, ribs scraping raw, and fell onto the roof. Then into the bushes below, I was outside, free. I sprinted to Miss Apple's gate, heart hammering. And then I saw it. Both of my notes, crumpled in her recycling bin. She'd never read them. Despair hit like a punch. But I didn't have time to cry. Brandon's truck was turning onto the street. I ran to her back door and knocked our childhood code. 3 fast. 2 slow, 3 fast. The door opened. I shoved my forearm in her face. The injury map. The timestamps. The truth written in ink and blood. Her eyes widened. Horror. Recognition. Belief. She pulled me inside. Locked the door and dialed 911. This time, someone heard me. The ambulance never came. I didn't want it to. All I wanted was for someone, anyone, to see the lock on my bedroom door. To believe that I hadn't imagined it, hadn't episoded my way into a prison of my own making. And when Detective Logan Ware knelt in front of me in Miss Apple's living room, his eyes steady and his voice calm, I knew he saw me. Not the troubled teen Brandon had rehearsed into existence, but the girl who'd carved proof into wood and written timestamps on her own skin like a human ledger of pain. He didn't flinch when I showed him my wrists. Didn't sigh like I was exaggerating. He just nodded, took out his phone, and photographed the rope burns from 3 angles. These tell a story, he said quietly. And I'm going to make sure the right people hear it. Back at the house, my house, though it didn't feel like mine anymore, the officers moved like ghosts through the rooms where I'd spent 3 days fighting to stay alive. They bagged the deadbolt like it was a murder weapon. Maybe it was. One officer crouched by my dresser, gently sliding it aside to reveal the words I'd scratched with a shard of glass. Locked from outside by Brandon. June 14th, 8:47 p.m. He didn't just snap a photo. He measured the depth of the grooves, noted the direction of the scratches, even compared the handwriting to a sample I gave him on a notepad. It was surreal, watching my panic become procedure. In the bathroom, another officer used tweezers to lift the strands of hair I'd tucked under the baseboard. "Smart," he murmured, sealing them in an evidence bag. "Real smart." I stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around myself, watching strangers treat my survival like science. Every hidden note, every loosened hinge pin, every smudged timestamp on my forearm, they weren't just proof I'd been trapped. They were proof I'd fought. And for the first time since my dad was led away in cuffs, I didn't feel crazy. I felt clear. At the ER, the nurse didn't ask if I was sure about what happened. She just documented. Rope burns, bilateral, circumferential, consistent with restraint. Lacerations on palms, glass-related irregular edges, embedded debris. Bruising on ankles, bilateral, oval-shaped, consistent with forceful gripping. She even noted the broken fingernails, avulsed at the quick, she wrote, and the raw patches on my ribs where I'd scraped through the bathroom window. When she finished, she handed me a printed copy of the full report. "Keep this safe," she said. "It's yours." That night, in a hotel room paid for by victim services, I sat on the edge of a stiff twin bed and stared at the walls. The silence was louder than Brandon's threats. No footsteps outside my door. No fake camera blinking red. Just me, a toothbrush Opal had brought me, and the crushing weight of what came next. Because escaping was only step 1. Step 2 was surviving the aftermath. My phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m., block number. I didn't answer. It rang twice more before going silent. No voicemail. Just the digital ghost of Brandon testing the waters, seeing if I'd still jump when he called. I screenshot the missed calls, saved them to 3 folders, and turned my phone face down on the nightstand. Control wasn't freedom, but it was something. The next morning, CPS called. Phyllis Chambers, her voice flat, efficient, asked where I'd been sleeping, if I had other family, whether I felt safe. I answered honestly but carefully. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stated facts like Detective Ware had taught me. Brandon installed an exterior deadbolt. My mother left knowing he was dangerous. I have medical documentation and physical evidence. She scheduled a meeting for 2 p.m. the next day. Standard procedure, she said. But the word she didn't say hung in the air. Neglect. Then came the call I'd been dreading. My mom. Her voice was thin, frayed at the edges. "Honey, Brandon showed me texts. You said you were going to hurt yourself. He said you broke the window on purpose. That you attacked him?" She sounded like she was reciting lines from a script, one he'd written for her. I took a breath. "Mom, he locked me in my room. From the outside. There's a deadbolt on the door. The police have it as evidence." A pause. Then softer. "He said you were confused. That your dad filled your head with lies. Did he show you the screws in my window frame?" I asked, voice steady. "Did he tell you he cut the power when I tried to message Maya? Did he mention the rope?" Silence. Then a choked sob. "I just wanted to give you space." "You gave him space," I said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. "You packed every suitcase and left me with a man who'd already drilled screws into my window." She started crying in earnest then, not for me, but for herself. For the story she'd told herself to sleep at night. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Instead, I said, "CPS wants us to meet together. Will you come?" Another long pause. Then, barely a whisper. "Yes." I hung up before she could say anything else that might make me break. The next day, Detective Ware called with news that made my stomach drop. Brandon had handed over screenshots of texts, supposedly from me, saying I'd made it all up and needed help. My blood ran cold. But then Ware said something that changed everything. "The timestamps don't match your carrier records. These were fabricated on a computer and sent to his phone to look real." I laughed. A sharp, broken sound. Of course he'd done that. Of course he'd built a digital paper trail to bury me under. But he hadn't counted on me documenting in real time. On carving truth into wood. On turning my body into a crime scene log. Ware asked if I'd let them examine my phone to verify metadata. I agreed instantly. "Good," he said. "That kind of cooperation strengthens your credibility." Later that afternoon, Opal came by with her laptop and a legal pad. She helped me write an affidavit, a sworn statement of everything that happened, from the moment my mom left to the second I fell into Miss Apple's bushes. I included every detail. The fake camera, the rehearsed voice memos I'd overheard through the vent, the way Brandon's hand bled when I bit him. Opal typed as I spoke, asking clarifying questions. What time did he cut the water? Where exactly did you hide the glass shard? When I signed the affidavit, my hand didn't shake. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was testifying. 2 days later, I had to go back to the house for a CPS home visit. Walking up the driveway felt like stepping into a haunted museum. The couch where he'd wrapped rope around my wrists. The stairs where he'd grabbed my ankle. My bedroom door, still bearing the scar of the deadbolt's removal, stood open like a wound. Phyllis photographed everything. The officers moved my dresser again, rephotographing the scratched message. In the bathroom, they recovered more hair from under the baseboard. Each piece of evidence was logged, bagged, labeled. I stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching my trauma become official record. That evening, my mom finally showed up at the CPS office for our supervised meeting. She looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, eyes red-rimmed. She wouldn't meet my gaze, I spoke plainly. No anger, no tears. Just facts. He said we had 3 days. He showed Miss Apple fake texts. You left knowing he'd already sealed my window shut. She shook her head. I didn't know he'd do that. You saw the screws, I said softly. You saw him smirk when you said you were leaving. You knew. She looked down at her hands. Didn't deny it. Didn't admit it. Just sat there, drowning in the silence she'd chosen. Phyllis slid a document across the table, an interim safety agreement. No contact with Brandon, supervised visits with me only. Family counseling. Mom read it slowly, her hand trembling as she signed. But she never said she was sorry. Never said she should have protected me. After she left, Phyllis told me, progress in these cases isn't about grand confessions. It's about small, enforceable steps, I nodded. But inside, I felt hollow. Because I realized something that day, my mom might never fully see what he did. She might always believe some version of his story, because it was easier than facing the truth that she'd abandoned me to a monster. Still, the wheels were turning. A week later, Detective Ware called with the news I'd been waiting for. A judge had signed a warrant to search Brandon's phone and computer. They were looking for the software he used to fake the texts, the voice memos he'd recorded, any digital footprint of his lies. He planned this, Ware said. But you planned too, and your evidence is what's making this case real. 2 weeks after that, the DA filed charges: unlawful restraint, tampering with evidence, and child endangerment. Brandon was ordered to stay 500 feet away from me at all times. A temporary protective order. Not justice, but a barrier. And for now, that was enough. CPS moved me from the hotel to a foster home. Lissa Turner, gray hair, calm eyes, zero tolerance for drama, met me at the office. Her house was small, quiet, and smelled like lavender and coffee. My room had a door that locked from the inside. I tested it 3 times that first night. Just to be sure, in counseling, I didn't talk about feelings. Not yet. We focused on sleep schedules, safety plans, grounding techniques. You don't have to process the trauma to survive it, my counselor said. Sometimes just staying alive is the victory. And then Miss Apple came to visit. She sat on Lissa's couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I need you to know, she said, voice trembling. I did see the words on your palm that day. Help, locked. But Brandon moved so fast. I thought I'd imagined it. I thought maybe you were having an episode. She reached for my hand. I'll never forgive myself for not acting sooner, but I'll spend every day making sure people know the truth now. I squeezed her hand back. You believed me when it mattered most. That's enough. That night, I recorded a voice. The first time I heard the phrase, too perfect, I thought Detective Ware was joking. We were sitting in a sterile conference room at the DA's office, 3 weeks after I'd been moved into Lissa's house. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. My voice was steady. I'd worn the same sweater I'd worn to the ER, still faintly stained with blood near the cuffs, because I wanted them to see consistency. To see that I hadn't changed my story? That I couldn't change it, because it was carved into my skin, scratched into wood, time-stamped in ink. But when Assistant District Attorney Elena Ruiz leaned forward and said, "Your documentation is unusually thorough," something in her tone made my stomach drop. She wasn't impressed. She was suspicious. Detective Ware shot her a look. She was locked in a room with an exterior deadbolt. She had no phone, no internet, no way out. She used what she had. Ruiz nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed sharp. I'm not saying she's lying, but defense attorneys will argue this looks rehearsed. Like she anticipated being questioned and manufactured evidence. I felt like I'd been slapped. All those hours carving words under my dresser, writing timestamps on my thighs, hiding hair under baseboards, acts of sheer desperation, were now being twisted into proof that I was too clever. Too controlled. Not traumatized enough to be believed. I didn't cry. I just looked Ruiz dead in the eye and said, if I'd known I'd need to prove I was trapped, I would have filmed it. But he cut the power. So I used a pen. Is that a crime too? She blinked. Then quietly, no, it's not, but the seed was planted. From that day on, every interview felt like a test. Would I flinch at certain questions? Would my timeline shift by even a minute? Would I sound angry instead of hysterical or calm instead of manipulative? I learned fast. Trauma doesn't get to look the way they expect. It has to look the way evidence demands. Brandon's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss, claiming I'd fabricated the entire incident to punish him for reporting my dad's assault. He argued the deadbolt was installed for home security, not imprisonment. That the rope was for crafts. That the scratches under my dresser? Teenage vandalism. And those fake texts from my mom? Misunderstood context. But then came the digital forensics report. Turns out, Brandon used a free app called TextFake Pro to generate the messages he showed Miss Apple. The software leaves a watermark in the metadata, a tiny string of code that timestamps creation and device origin. His phone showed the texts were generated at 11:03 p.m. on June 14th, the same night I escaped. Not days earlier like he claimed. Not from my mom's number, from his laptop. When Detective Ware showed me the report, I almost laughed. He'd been so careful with the physical lies, the rehearsed voice memos, the staged concern, but he forgot that digital footprints don't lie. Especially not when you're sloppy enough to use a free app with a watermark. The DA dropped the too perfect line after that. Instead, she called me into her office and said, "We're going to trial, and you're going to testify." I didn't feel brave. I felt sick. Testifying meant sitting 10 feet from Brandon in a courtroom. It meant describing how he wrapped rope around my wrists while my own mother stayed silent on the phone. It meant reliving the moment I realized she'd chosen him over me. But then Ruiz said something that changed everything. He's done this before. My breath caught. What? She slid a file across the table. Redacted, but clear enough. 2 years earlier, a 14-year-old girl in Brandon's old neighborhood had accused him of inappropriate touching. The case was dropped when her mother, under pressure from Brandon's then-wife, recanted. But CPS had kept the file open. And now, with my evidence, they were reopening it. He targets girls whose parents are unstable, Ruiz said. Divorced, grieving, overwhelmed. He inserts himself as the stable one, then isolates them, controls them. And when they speak up, he makes them look crazy. I stared at the file. That girl's name was redacted, but I knew her story like it was my own. The fake concern. The rehearsed lies. The way he made you doubt your own mind. I don't want him to do this to anyone else, I whispered. Ruiz nodded. Then you testify. Preparation was brutal. I met with a victim advocate twice a week to rehearse cross-examination. They role-played Brandon's lawyer grilling me. Isn't it true you hated your stepfather because he replaced your real dad? Didn't you tell your friend you'd make him pay after your dad went to prison? Why didn't you scream louder when the police came? Each question felt like a knife. But Lissa taught me a trick. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. And remember, you're not defending yourself. You're presenting facts. Meanwhile, my mom wavered. She started attending court-ordered counseling. Showed up to supervise visits with tearful apologies that never quite admitted fault. I just didn't want to believe it, she'd say, twisting her wedding ring, the one Brandon gave her after my dad left. He was so good to me. One afternoon, during a family session with Phyllis, I finally snapped. Good to you? He drilled screws into my window so I couldn't escape. He told me we had 3 days. And you packed every suitcase and left me here. That's not good. That's complicity. She flinched like I'd hit her. Then for the first time, she didn't deflect. She just whispered, I was scared. Of what? I asked. Of being alone, she admitted, tears streaming. Of losing everything. He promised me stability. And I believed him. It wasn't an excuse. But it was honesty. And in that moment, I saw her not as a villain, but as another victim of his manipulation. just one who had the power to protect me and didn't use it. The night before my deposition, I couldn't sleep. Lissa found me sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "Yes, I do," I replied. "Because if I don't, he'll find another girl. And she might not have a Miss Apple, or a detective wear, or a pen." The deposition lasted 6 hours. Brandon's lawyer tried to rattle me with graphic questions about the rope, the bite, the bathroom. But I stayed calm, stuck to timestamps, cited my injury map. When he asked why I didn't just call 911, I said, "He cut the power. My phone was dead. My only weapon was my memory." Afterward, Ruiz pulled me aside. "You were incredible. Cold, clear, consistent. That's what wins cases." 2 weeks later, Brandon took a plea deal, not because he admitted guilt, but because the evidence was overwhelming. Unlawful restraint, tampering with evidence, child endangerment, 3 years suspended sentence, mandatory counseling, and a lifetime protective order. He'd serve 6 months in county jail, then probation. My mom cried when she heard. "Not for me, for him. He's not a monster," she sobbed over the phone. "He made a mistake. I didn't argue. I just said, then let the system decide what kind of mistake it was." But the real victory came quietly. A month after the plea, Miss Apple called me. She'd been cleaning out her recycling bin and found one of my notes, crumpled, rain-stained, but still legible. She'd kept it. And when Brandon's lawyer tried to claim I'd never reached out for help, she handed it to the DA. It wasn't needed in court. But it mattered to me, because it proved I'd tried. Even when no one was looking, then came the call from Opal. "There's a girl," she said. 13. Her stepdad matches Brandon's pattern. New marriage, isolated mom, fake concern. CPS flagged it because of your case. They're investigating. I sat down hard on Lissa's kitchen floor. Did they stop him? Not yet. But they're watching, and they have your affidavit as a template. For the first time since that courtroom day when my dad was sentenced, I felt something other than fear or grief. I felt purpose. I started volunteering with a teen advocacy group, anonymous at first, just sharing my story in closed workshops. I taught girls how to document, how to hide evidence, how to write timestamps on their skin if they had to. Not because I wanted them to live in fear, but because I wanted them to know they weren't powerless. One girl wrote me a letter afterward. "I hid a note in my shoe like you did. My counselor found it. They believed me. That's when I knew my truth wasn't just mine anymore. It was armor for someone else." My dad got early release 6 months later. Good behavior, plus time served. We met at a park, far from our old house. He looked older, thinner, haunted. The first thing he said was, "I'm sorry I left you alone." I hugged him so hard I thought I'd break. "You didn't leave me alone," I whispered. "You gave me the courage to fight," he cried then, big, heaving sobs into my shoulder. And for the first time, I felt like we were both survivors, not just victims. I still have nightmares. Still flinch at the sound of drills. Still check every door lock 3 times before bed. But I also have a voice, and I'm done being quiet. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, there was too much body heat, too many murmurs, too much tension for that, but emotionally, it felt sterile. Like a lab where truth was dissected under bright lights and judged by people who'd never had to carve evidence into their own skin just to be believed. I sat in the front row beside Lissa, wearing the same navy sweater I'd worn to my first police interview. Not for luck. For consistency. I wanted the jury to see the same girl who'd shown up bleeding on Miss Apple's lawn, only now she wasn't begging. She was testifying. Brandon sat at the defense table in a cheap suit 2 sizes too big, his hands folded neatly in front of him like he was praying. He didn't look at me, not once. But I watched him. I watched the way his fingers tapped restlessly against his thigh when the DA played the voice memo he'd recorded. "She's been having episodes," filled her head with lies, and how his jaw tightened when the forensic analyst explained how TextFake Pro left digital fingerprints no amount of charm could erase. The trial lasted 8 days. 8 days of reliving every second, the deadbolt sliding shut, the rope biting into my wrists, the glass shard hidden in my sock like a secret weapon. 8 days of watching my own body become evidence, photos of my forearm map projected onto a screen, timestamps verified against ER records, My scratched message under the dresser entered into the official record as Exhibit 14. But the moment that broke him wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was when Miss Apple took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just said, voice steady, I saw the words on her palm. Help, locked. I thought I'd imagined it because Brandon moved so fast. But I never forgot it. And when she showed up at my door covered in blood, I knew I'd failed her once. I wasn't going to do it again. Then she pulled a crumpled, rain-stained note from her purse, the one she'd found in her recycling bin weeks after the fact, and handed it to the bailiff. The judge allowed it as supplemental evidence. It wasn't necessary to win, but it was necessary for me. Because it proved I'd tried. Even when hope felt like a waste of breath. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Unlawful restraint, child endangerment, tampering with evidence, and witness intimidation. The judge sentenced him to 4 years. No parole, no early release. And then, in a move that stunned even the DA, she added a lifetime ban from working with or living near minors. This wasn't just control, she said, looking directly at Brandon. It was grooming, and the court will not allow you another chance to practice it. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just exhaled, long and slow, like I'd been holding my breath for 2 years. After the verdict, my mom waited for me outside the courthouse. She looked older, frailer. Her hair was shorter, her eyes clearer. She didn't reach for me. Just stood there, hands clasped, like she wasn't sure she had the right. I read your affidavit again last night, she said softly. All of it. The timestamps. The scratches under the dresser. The way you wrote the rope burns happened at 8:47 p.m. She swallowed hard. I kept telling myself you were exaggerating, that Brandon was misunderstood. But the truth was, I didn't want to lose the life he gave me, even if it cost me you. I didn't say, it's okay, because it wasn't. But I did say, I needed you to see me. Not the version of me he sold you, she nodded, tears spilling over. I see you now. We didn't hug, not yet. But we walked to her car together, side by side, and that was enough for that day. A month later, my dad came home. He'd served 18 months of his 5-year sentence. Released early for good behavior and new evidence that surfaced during Brandon's trial. Texts between Brandon and my mom discussing how to handle my dad's interference. The DA didn't reopen his case, but the parole board took it into account. We met at the park where I'd taken my first steps. He was thinner, his beard streaked with gray, but his eyes were the same, warm, steady, full of the love that had gotten him locked up in the first place. I should have believed you sooner, he said, voice breaking. Before I threw that first punch? No, I said, squeezing his hand. You believed me exactly when I needed you to, and that gave me the courage to keep fighting after you were gone. We sat on a bench for hours, just talking. Not about the past, not about pain, but about the future. He'd enrolled in a counseling program, was working part-time at a community center, wanted to help other dads who felt powerless when their kids were in danger. I won't just be your protector, he said. I'll be your partner. And for the first time since that courtroom day when the judge said 5 years, I felt like we were both whole again. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some nights I still woke up gasping, convinced I heard a power drill outside my window. Some days I flinched when men raised their voices. But Lissa never pushed. She just left the porch light on when I couldn't sleep. Made tea when I couldn't talk. And when I finally started writing my story, not for court but for myself, she bought me a leather journal and said, "Tell it true. The rest will follow." I did. And that's how this video came to be. Because 6 months ago, I got a message from a girl named Maya. Not my best friend, but a stranger who'd seen a news clip about my case. She wrote, "My stepdad just installed a lock on my bedroom door. I don't know what to do." I didn't give her platitudes. I gave her a plan, write the time. Hide a note. Save screenshots. Tell one adult, even if they don't believe you at first. She did. And CPS intervened before he could tighten the screws. That's when I knew. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a lifeline. So I started speaking, at schools, at shelters, at training sessions for social workers. Not as a victim, as a witness. As proof that documentation is defiance, that survival is strategy. That truth, when carved into wood or written on skin, cannot be erased. Last week, I visited the house one last time. It's up for sale. The deadbolt is gone. The window screws have been removed. But I knelt in my old room and ran my fingers over the faint grooves under the dresser, locked from outside by Brandon. June 14th, 8:47 p.m. Still there, still legible. I didn't cry. I smiled because that message wasn't a plea anymore. It was a monument. Today, I live in a small apartment near campus. I'm studying forensic psychology, not to chase monsters, but to understand how they're made, and how to stop them before they find their next victim. My dad lives 2 blocks away. My mom and I have dinner once a week. It's awkward sometimes, but we're trying. And trying after everything feels like love. I still check my locks. Still save voice memos. Still carry a pen in my back pocket, just in case. But I'm not afraid anymore, because I learned the most important truth of all. You don't need someone to save you to be safe. You just need to believe in your own voice enough to use it. And if you're watching this right now, know this. Your truth matters, your pain is valid, and if no one believes you today, keep writing. Keep hiding notes. Keep carving proof into the world, because someone will find it, and they'll fight for you, even if it's you years from now, looking back and saying, I made it. And I won't let anyone else go through this alone. Thank you for listening, not just to my story, but to the silence between the words. That's where the real truth lives.